Hello guys, gals and empals, and welcome to the Futurama episode. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a very specific Futurama episode, one that I think has an intense amount of relevancy to the discussions around transphobia that we see in modern society and in the public discourse that's happening right now. This episode is, of course, Bend Her from Season 5, Episode 13, which is an interesting one that focuses all about gender politics and Olympic sports. And from that, I'm sure you can already kind of start to guess exactly how bad this episode gets and how blatant it becomes with the transgender stereotypes and transphobic messaging that happens, and we'll get into that later on. Before we do though, it's important that I do my due diligence as a content creator and chuck out firstly a spoiler warning. I will be spoilering this episode, Bend Her, because it's the one I'm discussing. It's almost impossible to do that without spoiling it, so if you haven't seen it or you want to go and watch it without me talking about it, go and do so. It's like 24 minutes. You won't enjoy it, it's really, really bad, and it's hot garbage, but you know, you can still go do it if you want to. And on the other side of that as well, I also want to give a trigger warning. This episode is going to contain a lot of transphobia and discussions of that transphobia. If you don't like that, or that's really horrible for you, maybe just don't watch this one. This might be a really bad one. Just go watch something a bit nicer, perhaps. So, there we go. With that out of the way, we can now move on to me giving a very, very brief introduction to Futurama as a TV series. Futurama is a sci-fi cartoon comedy series from the late 90s to early 2000s that also got renewed later on in the 2010s and had a bunch of movies in the late 2000s, but the show itself was about the crew of the Planet Express and the various adventures and hijinks that they got up to together in a very Simpson-esque style, but more futuristic. There are a bunch of main characters, such as Fry, the delivery boy who was cryogenically frozen in the year 2000 before being brought to the year 3000, which is when the whole thing is set. Professor Farnsworth, his closest relative and the owner of the Planet Express business, who is also a mad scientist stereotype and normally causes or starts all of the various adventures that happen within the show.
Good news, everyone! Good news, everyone! Good news, everyone! Good news, everyone! Good news!
We also have Leela, the captain of the Planet Express ship, and also a one-eyed mutant from beneath the Earth's surface, which is where all the mutants hide because they're a oppressed people who no one wants to see, so they all hide them away. You've also got Amy, a intern for Professor Farnsworth, who is also the daughter of the incredibly wealthy and rich Wong family. We also have Zoidberg, a lobster crayfish alien who is the ship's doctor. There's Hermes, the accountant for Planet Express, and also is Jamaican, as the show consistently and constantly reminds you throughout it in almost every single thing they do and every action they take. They make it very clear that they're Jamaican. It's hard to miss that part.
Sweet Lion of Zion, sweet Manatee of Galilee, sweet Gorilla of Manila.
And finally, there's Bender, who is the main focus of this episode, who is a bending unit and also the bad guy of the group. He does all of the evil criminal stuff, and he also sort of dislikes most people and does terrible stuff with no real justification for it except that he wants to do it. So that's the crew of Futurama, and that's a very brief summary of the show itself. And with that out of the way, we're now prepared, I think, to go and discuss this episode itself. It's taken a while to get here, but we're on track now.
Hooray! I'm useful! I'm having a wonderful time!
So this episode begins with the Planet Express crew going to the Olympic Games to see all the performances and also watch Hermes do the limbo, because he's Jamaican, limbo, you get the idea. And in the process, they also see the robots who are participating in the Olympics as well. Now, there are two kinds of robots, then this will become incredibly relevant throughout this entire episode. There are man-bots and there are fembots, and they're very distinct in the way that they act, the way that they look, and exactly what stereotypes they fulfill with regards to 2000s gender roles.
Hubba, hubba, she is built.
In Mexico, I believe. And that ain't silicon. It's tungsten. And plenty of it.
Really stupid. We don't have time to talk about that in depth right now, unfortunately. But just have that in the back of your mind, okay? So there are these two types of robots who are performing in their own separate events. And they're performing like that because they are differently abled. The manbots are significantly stronger and better at doing the hard work, whereas fembots are weaker and they're not as able to do tough, big jobs, so they could easily be dominated by the manbots. I think you might already be seeing where this is going, but Bender, seeing this, decides that rather than compete with the manbots because he'd lose, he's going to dress up as a woman and pretend to be a woman so he can participate in the woman sport. And so he does do that.
What do you mean I'm not registered? My name is Coilette, and I'm from, Rabonia. Coilette's a chick's name.
Yes, but Rabonia sounds like something somebody made up on the spot.
Ever been beaten up by a guy dressed like a chick?
All of this goes well for him, where he manages to win a bunch of events because he easily dominates all of the real fembots in the sport, and he manages to secure a whole bunch of Olympic medals. Unfortunately, he didn't plan for the fact that the Olympics committee would have a gender test for robots, where they make sure that you have the correct fem oil, because there is fem oil and testosterone, and those are the things that make you into your gendered stereotype robot of a binary gender, and yet again, don't have time to get into the science of that and exactly how that makes zero sense whatsoever. Just there's worse stuff in this episode to talk about. We really can't get distracted here. And he decides that he wants to keep his Olympic medals and he wants to beat this test, so he goes to Professor Farnsworth and demands that Professor Farnsworth makes him into a woman bot and give him a sex change.
I don't need friends. I need a sex change operation, and give it to me now.
Bender, a robot sex change is a complex and dangerous procedure. Replacing your testosterone with fembot lubricants can cause wild mood swings, and the effects may be irreversible. Well, let's get started.
This leads to both of the women of the group, Leela and Amy, getting incredibly offended and saying that it's disrespectful to all of the women who are participating in the sport and women in general because their gender is not a joke and shouldn't be taken lightly by Bender, who is actually taking it lightly, who is effectively pretending to be a woman and getting a sex change purely so that they can steal a bunch of medals from women, and they're pretending to be it, and with the full knowledge that after they've got those medals and they've taken them from the rightful women, they're going to then get a sex change back, presumably, and that just lets them keep their medals. And in this context, where Bender is a person pretending to do that purely so they can steal medals, Amy and Leela are right, and that's kind of messed up a little bit, and we'll get later on into why that whole context and that whole framing is incredibly messed up. But let's get back to the plot synopsis now. So Bender gets the sex change, the replacement of his man oil, testosterone oil, with women oil, fem oil, and during the entire process we see Fry, the confused man, being disgusted by the whole thing, but also really curious to see what this looks like or how this works.
I can't watch this because it's creepy and wrong and sick. However, I will watch out of curiosity.
Fry is playing the part here of the cis male who doesn't really get the whole trans stuff, but wants to watch it because of a level of gross voyeurism as part of that, which is yet again another standard stereotype that we see when we're talking about how people treat transgender issues and transgender bodies, is this idea of wanting to see them but also being disgusted by them. So Futurama really does manage to cover almost all of the bases when it comes to transphobia in this episode. And everyone is horrified by the whole sex change, but not in the way that they're horrified by Bender doing it, as if his actions are bad. They're horrified by the very nature of the sex change itself. The idea that people getting a sex change is disgusting. Which, it's the year 3000. This is 1,000 years in the future. People are doing orgies all the time. They're having crazy hookups with almost anything at all. Isn't it kind of weird that people are still disgusted by this stuff in particular? That this kind of transphobia just hasn't gone anywhere at all since the year 2000? Shouldn't that be something of dispute or something that should be talked about.
Which will shortly erupt in an orgy of invertebrate sex.
Oh, baby, I'm there!
Fry, do you even understand the word invertebrate?
Nope, but that's not the word I'm interested in. No need to pack pants, people! Let's roll!
Show doesn't think so. Show does not discuss that whatsoever. It just moves on quickly because it's not prepared to have those kind of conversations, I suppose. But, like I said, Bender, or Coilette as he is pretending to be, succeeds in passing the gender test and manages to keep all of his medals. After this, Bender wants to get the sex change back. All the women are incredibly pissed off at him because they think that he's representing women poorly, that he's showing them up by acting as a guy or doing all this sort of very sexist stereotypes of women, even though both of them themselves have done incredibly sexist stereotypes of women throughout the show without any real pushback, so it's not like they can be the ones to judge that. They're more annoyed about the fact that Bender is a man pretending to be a woman than anything else.
Oh yeah, baby, come on. Work your cans. Shake it out.
I don't know which I'm more, enraged or disgusted.
I'm just out there making us ladies look good.
Nuh-uh. You're making us look like jerks in front of the other gender.
If it was a woman doing what Bender was doing, they wouldn't have a problem. But just because Bender is a man, pretending to, that's the real issue for them. That's the real problem here.
That is so unbelievably manipulative.
Come on. You never went on a date with a guy just because you were hungry?
Well, I thought I might like him on a full stomach.
Nice try, sister.
Which, yet again, very on the nose. We'll get to talk about that later on. He doesn't change back immediately though, because he gets a call from a network who want him to come on, and lured in by the promise of fame, he decides to keep being a woman for a bit because, well, if he can get fame and money from it, why not? Why not keep doing that? And on the show, he meets Calcutron, a very famous robot actor who is smitten by Bender pretending to be Coilette. And Bender decides to rope Calcutron along, to rope this man-bot along, because he wants to take his money and his wealth and to get all the cool gifts that Calcutron gives him. So Bender is pretending to be a woman-bot so he can trick the man-bot and take all the stuff from the man-bot because he's a terrible person who likes to steal things or who likes to get things and to manipulate people.
These gifts have been coming non-stop. I think Calculan's falling for you.
Bah, any day now he'll dump me for a new wad of arm candy. And then I can turn back into a guy and hawk all this stuff. It's just a game.
During this whole time, Coilette, or Bender, continues to act in ways that affirm this idea that he's a guy pretending to be a woman, doing stuff that fits the typical male gaze that we see in media, and putting impressions of what women should act like based on the ideas of men, and it's just this whole mess.
Many young fembots wish to emulate you. Any advice for them?
Yes, Humorbot. If you ask me, women today are too stuck up to go out and jiggle their jello like everybody wants them to. In fact, should I do it now?
And throughout this entire time, Fry keeps acting in ways that are very confused. Like when Bender is talking about going on a date with Calcutron, Fry is disgusted and also confused about if he's actually into a guy and what that makes him and how does that work, even though Bender's a robot. He's a robot. They're both robots. They're all robots. Technically speaking, robots don't have a gender because they're made from metal. They don't even have sex. Then they don't have sexes. They have no biological sexes because they're not biological. They're robotically manufactured. So it doesn't make any sense. It just makes no sense at all that they would have these strict binary gender stereotypes that we have currently based off of biological sexual stereotypes that we've also created to fit a binary concept that we built up over hundreds of years. Robots shouldn't have that. It's also weird that the Futurama crew is disgusted by the idea of Bender going on a date with Calcutron.
You've got to tell me, you're not actually attracted to Calculon, right? And if you are, don't tell me. Are you?
Certainly not. But just once I'd like to eat dinner with a celebrity who isn't bound and gagged. Is that so much to ask?
Well, I think you dating a man-bot is a disgrace, and I refuse to be involved.
Like, oh, you're not a real woman going to date, you're a man going to date. And it's like, well, okay, firstly, that shows some real issues with regards to exactly how people who are acting in a feminine way might be perceived, but also, is there an issue with male robots going on dates with male robots? Is that a problem for people? Because it shouldn't be, not in the year 3000, not when people are, yet again, like I said beforehand, having orgies with anything and anybody. And this just reinforces this idea that Futurama is just bringing the terrible bigotry and stereotypes that come from a 2000 perspective of white cis dudes to the year 3000, that they haven't considered ways that things might develop or change in that period of time. They just assume that things would remain stationary all the way throughout, and they just imprint their own versions and their own terrible ideas onto that. And that shows a real lack of forward thinking. It shows a real lack of actually being able to conceive how things might change or how things might develop. It's an incredibly weak point for the Futurama TV series as a whole, and yet again, not the point of this video, so we're just going to zip that argument there and just keep moving on. And finally, this all reaches a point when Calcutron wants to marry Bender, but Bender's not ready for that kind of commitment, but he does kind of like Calcutron right now in a way that isn't properly explored, in that he might actually be attracted to Calcutron, but he doesn't admit it or doesn't really think about it.
No, I just don't want to hurt him or humiliate him. Oh, curse this woman's heart.
Good night forever, my turtle dove.
Good night, Calculon.
He wants to get out. He wants to get away from this. So Leela offers to help him get out of this wedding and to get out of being Coilette, but in return, he has to promise that he'll never pretend to be a woman again. And they finally resolve this whole episode, everything goes back to normal, and Bender learns the lesson that men should never pretend to be women. And that sex changes, and that people who do any of that stuff are disgusting and gross and bad.
Okay, look. If I help you with this, do you promise to get out of my gender and stay out?
I hope this has taught you a lesson about changing your sex to win 5 gold medals.
It truly has.
That's the synopsis of the episode, and I realise that we still have quite a bit to go because we actually need to go through and discuss what the hell all of this is and why I've brought all of this to your attention. But before we do, I just want a quick palate cleanser, so we're just going to watch a really cute video of a raccoon. I'm just going to throw that up quickly. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Okay, quick palate cleanser done. We'll watch another one at the end of this episode so we can all hopefully go back to our lives not feeling too horrified. But why have I brought up this incredibly terrible episode of Futurama? Why am I discussing this now when it's 17 years later from when it was actually aired? Because there's one thing I want to talk about this episode that I actually was thinking about the entire time when I rewatched this episode recently. And that was the way that all of these issues, all of this transphobia, these stereotypes, this whole framing of the way that Bender is a dude pretending to be a woman to steal from the rightful women, and that it's disgusting and wrong that he would do that, and that sex changes are also gross, and that men should just stay in their lane and they can't become women within the context of robots. That was almost exactly as I was thinking about it. The way that we're seeing a lot of trans issues being discussed right now in public spaces, especially with regards to the US and the UK. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard just released a bill that was all about getting trans women out of women's sports because it's unfair to women that these trans women would come in and steal from the rightful women who can't possibly compete, even though there is no evidence to suggest that is the case, and the Olympics Committee and a variety of other sports committees don't back that kind of stuff because there is no scientific element to that. Regardless, this concept still remains that trans women are a threat to real women, to actual women. And also behind that concept is the idea that trans women aren't really women. That they are still different, they are separate in a way that does buy into this kind of stereotype, into this bigoted view that Futurama consistently talks about within this episode. And this is, I think, a very good way of thinking about the fact that a lot of the modern transphobia that we're dealing with here, a lot of the arguments that are posed by opponents and anti-trans organizations, are almost the exact same as the anti-trans opinions and anti-trans bigotry from 20 years ago. These aren't new ideas, these aren't radical issues that have just been brought up all of a sudden. They are the same reiterated concepts that we've already seen in the past. I mean, these people are literally just repeating some stuff from a episode 17 years ago, and even back then, 17 years ago, the Futurama Bender episode was kind of dated. Sure, other shows around that same period also did have a couple of trans people here and there, or did kind of put trans people in a bad light. I'm sure we can all think about Friends or How I Met Your Mother and the way that they treat trans people.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
I love you.
I used to be a dude.
So, are you his mother or his father? What? I've never seen one before.
Dad, there's Ross. Why don't you go talk to him?
I didn't even have a chance to act as though I'm okay with it.
Don't you have a little too much penis to be wearing a dress like that?
But those were normally throwaway jokes or side jokes, and no one really found them that tasteful. Movies were kind of trying to move on as well. We'd moved on from the movies where trans people were either rapists, or they were sexual offenders, or prostitutes that were killed, and trans people were starting to move to being actual people that had some representation. And within that framing, an entire episode dedicated to positioning the whole transness and the idea of trans identities and transitioning or sex changes as this vile thing that is just impossible to understand and creates revulsion in anyone who sees it, was already a little bit out of step with the times. Futurama, in this sense, was already kind of falling behind a little bit, and it already did fall behind quite significantly when it came to the way that it represented genders and also sexualities, so it's no surprise this was the case. But all of that's important when we start thinking, or we start discussing, how a lot of people haven't moved on from those kind of concepts. That while we think we've progressed quite significantly, a lot of the discussions that some people, especially cis people, are having are still rooted in those same concepts. They've just updated it to look slightly nicer, or to have nicer words. But the fundamental ideas are the exact same. So this Futurama episode is, like a lot of the Simpsons episodes, predictive of the future. Somehow, they did manage to predict exactly how trans discourse was going to go in the year 2018, 2019, and 2020. They managed to somehow see into the future by replicating the exact same negative bigotry that they saw at that exact moment, and by following that thread along its natural course, they managed to predict where we were going to be now. Before we get into some further stuff here, I do want to quickly say that I'm not cancelling Futurama here. This is a thing people get into a lot when you bring up any kind of issues of a show that they might like. People get very offended or very hurt, and they think that you're attacking them or the thing that they love personally, and that's not the case. Futurama has some good episodes, but take away those nostalgia goggles and those rosy-eyed tints, and there's also a lot of garbage in there too. It's very hit and miss. It wasn't a perfect show, and a lot of the times it did really produce some crap like this episode Bender. It's important that we recognize those screwed up episodes, those really bad pieces of media, because for us to forget them lets us get to where we are now, where we see the exact same problems replicated and think that they're new, where we see all of this transphobia occurring and go, well, this came out of nowhere. This is wild that people would suddenly start believing this, that these people who consider themselves to be progressive would all of a sudden be pushing for these kind of ideas, when the creators of Futurama, who are people who consider themselves to be progressives, were also pushing the same thing 20 years ago. We just kind of forgot about the bad episodes. And that's unfair. It's important to remember the garbage too, because the garbage has a large impact on society as well. It fades into the background, but doesn't mean that it fades from memory, or that it fades from your subconscious. It just nestles in there and influences the way that you think. I'm not saying that Futurama explicitly led to the transphobia and the bigotry we're seeing right now, but I'm saying that it was indicative of an attitude and a mood at the time towards trans people that hasn't drastically changed. And I also want to, in covering my own ass here, quickly just go through two things. Firstly, I'm not cancelling Futurama. I physically can't cancel it. The show's already long gone, okay? I'm sorry for people who liked it, but it's dead. It's already been dead for a long time. Me talking about it on this episode is not going to do anything to the show. It's long gone. And secondly, I'm sure some people are going to say that, well, the way this episode is positioned though, that Bender is literally a guy pretending to be a woman, isn't a commentary on trans people. There's no trans people in the episode at all, technically speaking. But that's not the point. The point isn't that there aren't any trans people in there. The point is that all of the elements of transness that is put into this episode, all of the points that are relevant to the idea of trans people, that are represented through the way that Bender acts and the way that Bender engages with stuff, and also the way that society reacts to that, is still in there. And rather than it being a joke that people's bigotry and their reactions to it, the joke is on the transness. People are laughing at that representation, at that stereotyping of trans people. The joke is on the minority community here, not with them. And that is why it's a terrible episode. That's why it's one of the worst episodes ever made with regards to transphobia. And I literally can't think of anything even close to as bad as this episode. But its badness is an important thing to take note of when we start discussing transphobia in media, and we start discussing the way that has influenced people's opinions and people's ideas throughout the past 20 years. So that's what I wanted to talk about this episode. I want to discuss the way that pieces of content like this Futurama episode are a very good indicator of troubling attitudes, and also can be used as a way of looking at how we currently think about minority groups, or how we currently think about representation or stereotypes, and we can perhaps see some kind of connective bridge between those old past ideals and the modern issues that we face. And perhaps realize that these aren't new problems, these are old problems, just repackaged in a different way. And that we haven't perhaps moved as far as we might like to think that we have. That we are still dealing with a lot of old issues that are really ingrained into society and into the way that people think. This entire episode could literally just be as if it was written by a trans-exclusionary radical feminist or modern conservatives in the United Kingdom. It does feel like it was almost exactly a replication of that, to the point where if it was released today, you would think that the movement had something to do with it. And that leaves us with a lot to think about. Also, the gender stuff, the robot gender stuff. No sense. Just completely inane. One of the most ridiculous things that Futurama does. I can't believe that it just happens, and it happens consistently throughout the entire show, and it's never really properly addressed. We also wake about the way that gender is presented through Professor Farnsworth, who consistently brings up how women are bad, or how women are emotional, or they're flawed, and no one refutes him. No one pushes back when he says that, or we talk about how Bender is old, the fem oil is changing who you are, you're becoming all crazy and flighty like a woman.
Dear Lord, a coaster! The femsoil must be sashaying girlishly into your processor. Oh dear, her mood swings are getting wilder. She's becoming a slave to her emotions. Just like all women, you're falling into the final debilitating stages of womanhood. Ew, sentimental drivel poop.
None of the women, like Amy or Leela, push back against that, but they have a real problem with what Bender's doing. That's the real problem here, not the sexist stereotypes that are happening around Bender. That's just never discussed in the episode at all. It's a really bad episode. And now that we're here at the end, I did promise another cute video, so we'll watch another raccoon video, because I really like raccoons, and I think we deserve something like that, you know? I think we deserve a little raccoon every now and then.
Dude, what? How? How? Are there this many of you right now? You guys are unreal.
Yeah, that's cute as shit. Okay, well, thank you for watching this video. I hope that you learned something, or that you enjoyed watching it, or that you felt horrified by the transphobia in Futurama, and you're now going to go and write to the creators of Futurama and make it clear that their 17-year-old episode was hot garbage and they should feel bad about it. One of those three. I mean, anything like that that'll warm my heart that had the reaction that I wanted. Other than that, you can support me by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting on this. They're all useful, especially the sharing one, because it helps to beat the YouTube algorithm, which is completely impossible to work out. So working around it is the only real way to go for a lot of people. You can also support me explicitly by giving me money on my Patreon, which I will link below in the description. It's all very helpful because it helps me to pay for food and rent, which is useful because I don't need to worry about those, and I can just focus on making videos like this instead. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.